And now joining us on Book TV on C-SPAN 2 is Dr. Judith Reisman. She is most recently the author of this book, Sexual Sabotage: How One Mad Scientist Unleashed a Plague of Corruption and Contagion on America. Dr. Reisman, who was this mad scientist that you're referring to?
Well, a lot of people really sort of know who he is by now, I'm happy to say, or unhappy to say, I don't know which, and that would be Dr. Alfred C. Kinsey, the founder of the Kinsey Institute, which is still alive and rushing along. He's not alive, he's gone to his reward. But it's still going on in Bloomington, Indiana, at the Indiana University, and gender reproduction, the Kinsey Institute, and he, yes, was a man who was involved in the sexual torture of hundreds of children in his own work. And I keep trying to say that is not a reliable scientist, but it's been a little difficult to get that across.
Well, very quickly remind us about the Kinsey report and where he came from and how he developed that whole
Sure. Well, World War II was over, and officially in 1945. Our guys were returning from overseas. They were traumatized. The nation was traumatized. And a couple years later, 1948, Kinsey's book comes out called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And the propaganda around it, and I do officially call that propaganda, it was marketing propaganda, was that this man, this great conservative scientist, was going to tell the American public the truth about all of us, what we were doing sexually, what our grandparents were doing sexually, and our parents were doing sexually, and he was going to reveal the real facts and lift the curtain off what we were hiding all this time. And what that was that we were really a bunch of sexual adventurers, and that mommy and daddy were involved in various kinds of adultery, and that everybody was doing all these bizarre things. And the public didn't necessarily believe it, but a lot of the professors certainly did, and so it was picked up in universities all over the country, and from there it filtered down to every place.
Who funded his study?
Yes, well, the Rockefeller Foundation not only funded his study, but when he looked like he was getting in big trouble with Congress, they shifted the money from Kinsey directly into what they call the American Law Institute Model Penal Code, which is why I'm here in the law school, because our laws were gutted and were changed based on all these frauds and these lies.
Dr. Reisman, why did you call him a conservative scientist?
Oh, because they defined him as conservative. Americans would never have accepted a man who was he was a bi-homosexual. There's big argument of which is which, but no argument. He was certainly a bizarre person. He was having sex with his students. He was having sex, making pornography up in his attic and in the university. He was engaged in so many bizarre things, including things that actually brought about orchitis, which was massive damage to his lower nether regions, because he was so abusive to himself. So this was not a normal guy, and he certainly was the major proponent of the idea that children are sexual from birth and that they can be unharmed by sex with adults.
Given that this happened in 1948, are there lasting effects to the Kinsey studies?
Huge. Absolutely huge. I had no idea when I started on this thing. I really didn't. I just copied off his charts and graphs with this little 2-month-old baby and with this little 5-year-old, and all these things were being done to these children and calling them orgasms around the clock, 24. I just copied them off, and I sent it to my colleagues, as in the ethical field of science. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go do something else. They'll take care of it. And that was in 1980. So they didn't take care of it. And it took me years to figure out why. And it turned out that, yes, Kinsey's research became the foundation for major changes, every major change in our sex laws, and have gone through to today globally. I just came back from a global tour. Kinsey's everywhere. In China, indeed. And in Serbia, and in Switzerland, and in Sweden, and in Holland, the Netherlands, of course. So he has been a foundational change for the West worldwide.
When you say he's in China, what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a book that the Kinsey Institute put out in 2007 called Kinsey, the Man Who Changed the World. And they translated that into Chinese. And so it sold 500,000 copies in 2007, and I was contacted by some Chinese professors who asked me, they said they looked everywhere for something contradicting because the change in sexual conduct among the Chinese youth was enormous following the release of that book. They said, wow, sex, drugs, rock and roll, we can do that too, yeah? And so they contacted me and asked me if they could translate my book, this book, into Chinese as some kind of response to the fraud that was in the Kinsey research. By the way, remember, Liam Neeson appeared as Kinsey in a major feature film, Fox feature film, saying, you know, he was this wonderful man who did all these good things for us. So, no, he's everywhere. The Swiss did a major documentary last year identifying Kinsey as the basis for their horrific sex education programs in Switzerland. And as I said, I just came back from the Philippines. He's involved in every aspect. Look, he's the guy who revolutionized sex for us and said you could do all these things with no downside. Well, okay, people, we have had some serious downsides. You know, we have a Pentagon now. You know how many guys were found using child pornography in the Pentagon. We have judges who've been picked up. We have presidents of universities. We have coaches, you know, in football coaches and so forth. And people are being told it was always like this. Well, I have news for you, people. It was not always like this.
When did you first get interested in this research that you're doing?
Well, actually, it always comes down to something like this. It was very personal. I was living in a sort of nostalgic little world, writing for Captain Kangaroo, singing songs, you know, doing television for CBS, ABC, NBC. And my daughter was sexually assaulted by a 13-year-old boy who lived upstairs, came from an intact family. And I began to look around and to say, wait a minute, how did this happen? It made no sense. And following that trail led me to Dr. Kinsey, which led me to Hugh Hefner, who called himself Kinsey's pamphleteer, which moved me into looking into the pornography issue, which made me the principal investigator for U.S. Department of Justice study on images of children crime and violence in Playboy, Penthouse, and Hustler. So there we are.
Should pornography be outlawed?
Oh, yes. Yes, we can go back to the original. It was, you know. It was one time. And we don't lose anything by going back to that. I mean, it's had a huge impact on child sexual abuse. No question about that. I won in the Netherlands where I said that. I was on television and in the Netherlands, and I said that Playboy had been producing child pornography and had been conditioning people, based on our research for DOJ, since at least the 50s, actually, depending on how you looked at it. And Playboy sued me for libel and slander in the Netherlands. They won't sue me here. They would never sue me here. I say, sue me here. Give us a jury trial here. And the judge looked at all the documentation, the images of the children, the in bed with daddy or whoever, and said, no, she's right. You know, they lose. Playboy loses. So to little old me, you know, multi-billion-dollar outfit just lost.
When and where did you get your PhD, and what is it in?
PhD was from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. 1980, I think, or 79. I'm getting too old to remember these things. And it was on communication, on the way in which mass media affects changes the human brain, and changes the human being, and changes the culture.
And what are you doing here at Liberty University now?
I am bringing my wide knowledge to the faculty here, and they have taken my archive, which is massive, in the next room, and thousands of books and many, many, many thousands of documents, so that there will be a home for this material, and we'll be able to at least have a record of this whole history of the sexual revolution as it was changed in the United States and the Western world. And
Sexual Sabotage is your third book, correct?
Well, it depends on how you count, but yeah, third or fourth, yeah.
You working on another one?
Yes, on the fallout in terms of child sexual abuse, which is massive pandemic and it's global.
Judith Reisman, Joining us here at Liberty University on Book TV, Sexual Sabotage, How One Mad Scientist Unleashed a Plague of
No marriage is perfect, obviously, and there are up times and down times, and people go through great deals of difficulties. Somebody's sick, a child is sick, the employment situation is looking very bad at that particular time. And in those kinds of situations, the sexual life of the couple will usually suffer. That's the point of marriage. You get through those times together. You light a candle for each other. You rub each other's feet. You try to help each other. You don't pull a pornographic video out of essentially mentally ill people who are themselves suffering, or they would never put themselves into films of that nature. They would never expose themselves like that to you or to anybody else. And so you don't rely on the pain of other people that may be described and disguised with a smile. You don't rely on the pain and the suffering of other human beings in order to stimulate your temporarily lagging sexual life. You sit down and you talk to each other and you tell each other that you care. And you try to do something pleasant. You take a walk together. You read maybe even a poem to each other, which nobody really does anymore, but find something beautiful to do. And yes, you can, if you have the capacity for religious belief, if you love God, then you can certainly go to prayers and to psalms in the Bible. Go a little bit deeper than the superficial McDonald's answer, the Big Mac, which is your local pornography film, which can only debase you. It can only debase the person that you love, and can only funnel more money into the pornography industry, which is exploiting the mentally ill men and women in those films for it's not for your pleasure. It's for an excitation level that you will never be able to have when you love the human being that you love. And then you decide, oh, well, I guess I don't love my husband. I guess I don't love my wife because I'm more excited by the pornographic, dirty film I just saw than I am when I make love with my wife or my husband. No, ladies and gentlemen. Do yourselves a favor. Go back in time. Go back in time and try to recapture your love. And you didn't fall in love because you were watching a dirty movie.